why are people misunderstanding what interior design is? For example, people might say, why are people getting a master's degree at GW? It's so expensive, and it's interior design. Anyone can be an interior designer. And we know that that's not true.
Welcome to the On the Wall podcast, where we engage in conversations with artists, designers, enthusiasts, and visionaries who shape the world of interiors. Today's guests are Professor Stephanie Travis and Professor Catherine Anderson from the Corcoran School of Art and Design at George Washington University. If you enjoyed these conversations, please subscribe, leave a rating, leave a review, and share this podcast with a friend. Welcome to the On the Wall podcast. Thank you for joining me. It's just going to be me hosting today. Winnie Williams got caught with some train delays from London back home. So delays or cancellations or something. We'll have to get the story on that the next time we're together. So next podcast, we'll have to catch up with Winnie and see how she's doing and hear all about the train drama and the fun Canadian trip. But today I am joined by two professors, Stephanie Travis and Catherine Anderson, who are both professors at the Corcoran School of Arts and Design at George Washington University. They have recently teamed up to write and publish a book called Interior Design is Not Decoration and Other Ideas. Stephanie and Catherine, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
So I read the book and it's great. But before we dive into it, I'd love to just get a little bit of background and really find out about like how you guys, I know you're teaching at the same school. Do I have all that right? I know you have extensive experience in the design industry, but now you're both teaching at George Washington University. But how did you guys meet? Did you know each other before you were teaching there together? And give me some of that background.
Yeah. Okay. So no, we met in 2009 when I got to GW. Catherine had been there, I think, for like a year already. But we have very similar backgrounds and we're the exact same age. So we kind of have had this like similar trajectory. And I'll just give you a brief and then Catherine can tell you hers. But I studied architecture at University of Michigan. I went there for undergrad and grad. And then I moved to DC. I was working for an architect. And then I moved to New York. And first I worked for Gensler, which is a huge firm on the architecture side. But I realized I loved the small firm because you get to do so much more, especially as a young, person professionally. And I ended up working at Vincent Wolf in New York, who is an acclaimed designer. He's on, the Interior Design Hall of Fame, AD 100. He's just incredible. And that's really where I fell in love with interior design. And okay. I was like, I'm never going back to architecture, basically, because I loved really thinking about the user experience, which I thought was like really a big focus, as well as a lot of contact with the client and custom furniture, which I'm such a fan of furniture design. So that was really fun and interesting and taught me how complicated just one little piece can be when you're looking, working with different vendors. But also materiality. So working there just opened my eyes up to interiors, and I got an adjunct position at FIT in New York. And then one thing led to another, and I heard about this job at GW and I took it. So that's where I've been.
So what was it about? What was it about architecture that you felt was lacking in comparison to interior design?
Personally, yeah. Obviously school is very conceptual, but you're really just focusing on the exterior. So it was, and it was very, lots of, concrete and glass. We didn't really get into the interior of it, like how a user, approaches the building and walks through the space. And we never really got to the point of doing like a full space plan and selecting, finishes, furniture. We didn't get into like color really. There's just, because it's such a big scale, and interiors is obviously a smaller scale, like depending on what you're working on, of course. But like at Vincent, a project would go a year and you would see what you designed, pretty soon after. It was just more satisfying for me personally. But I think it was just the human element of it. Just hit harder in interiors. And that was just my experience. And, that's why I was like, I want to, when I teach, because I really loved teaching adjuncting and I was seeking a full-time position, but I specifically wanted to do an interiors program for that reason. Yeah.
Gotcha. And what about you, Catherine?
On the Wall is brought to you by Milton & King, your trusted partner for luxury crafted wall coverings. Milton & King's trade program is designed to make your creative process seamless, offering exclusive trade-only benefits such as complimentary samples, early access to new collections, and professional pricing structured to enhance your business success. To assist with your projects, you'll have the flexibility to create your own custom swatchbook, tailored specifically to your design needs. With dedicated customer support every step of the way, our trade program is here to elevate your design vision and simplify your journey from inspiration to installation. Ready to join a partner who understands your craft? Visit miltonandking.com to apply for your trade account today. Milton & King, your vision, our craftsmanship.
Well, as Stephanie said, I also graduated from architecture school. And so my first job working was looking at restoring bathrooms and stairwells. And I was pretty miserable. I didn't realize that this was the life of an architect. And then I had an opportunity to work at a different firm. And that's mostly what they did was interiors. And in architecture school, they never uttered the word interior design. Like those two words are never put together. And so
That's interesting.
it opened up a whole new world for me. Yeah, it's crazy because the two disciplines are so closely aligned with each other. So I started working and I realized that I love the speed with which you work, the ability to actually have your hand in the design, because when you're in architecture, you just don't have that opportunity. The scale of the work, as Stephanie mentioned, is completely different. One of the jobs that I worked on was taking up an entire city block, and
Oh, wow.
but the project took probably close to 15 years to complete in Washington D.C. So that's when I realized I don't want to ever go back to architecture. So then I worked professionally in interiors, and then I had an opportunity to teach, and then that's what I just got really hooked on teaching. So I left in 2007 the sort of the working world, and so joined academia. And I think we both feel pretty blessed to be teaching.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to have that professional experience, like really putting together a construction document set, getting into sort of the details. I think that's one thing. Like in other disciplines, they come right out of a PhD and they go right to teaching, and that's the norm. But I think in design, it's really important that, we have that experience and that we take the NCIDQ because we're telling our students to take that exam. And so it's worked out. Yeah, it's worked out really well.
You have the practical skills as well as the conceptual.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, aside from, you're both in the same environment. What is it that brings you sort of together, like a meeting of the minds on, because this isn't your first book, right? You've written a book together before.
This is our second, and we're actually working on a third. So yes, we
are
are very compatible as far as just working on these creative projects. What do you think?
I think, Stephanie and I we're very similar, but we're also very different. We approach design in a similar way, but then we see different things. And so I think working together, when you work in a firm, you're very collaborative. You never work on a project by yourself. But then when you switch to academia, you're basically teaching on your own. You have some collaboration with your colleagues, but it's just not the same. And so when Stephanie and I would just talk, we would always be talking about design, the students, the sort of the state of interior design. Always had some ideas brewing. So it was just always natural for us. So we started out as colleagues, but then we just became really good friends.
So then, how did the idea for this book come about? Was one of you the catalyst, or how did it come about?
I think we both kind of had the same thoughts, which are, why are people misunderstanding what interior design is? For example, people might say, as an interior designer, you're just picking finishes, or you're just doing the paint color, or, why are people getting a master's degree at GW? It's so expensive. And it's interior design. Anyone can be an interior designer. And, we know that that's not true. To be a designer, you need education, and, there's a plethora of other experiences. But it was kind of like, gosh, this is such a dynamic profession, right? There's so much that we need to know to be successful. You need to understand psychology. There's obviously materials and finishes. That's one aspect, but there's also codes and understanding people and technical, there's just everything that, all the chapters in the book. So the title is like a little cheeky, it's like interior design is not decoration. I mean, of course it is decoration, but it is so much more than that. And that's what we tried to do. So it's really kind of a love letter to like 30 years in the industry, each of us. And, being that we were very compatible, when we broke up all the chapters, we're like, okay, if interior design is not decoration, what is it? It's, and that's where the chapters come in. It's, media and culture, it's products, it's the profession. And then we sort of like naturally were drawn to what we were each interested in, which was like a good balance. And so we each took our own chapters.
Exactly. Yeah.
I guess it's not a way of saying like the common perception of interior design is incorrect, but you're basically saying there's a whole lot more to it. It's just what most people think of it as just a very small window into the larger field, I guess.
Right. And even decorating is, you need a really great eye. You need talent. Like even people who are just doing decorating, they're not, they don't have a degree and maybe they're just focusing on residential or smaller projects. It's not easy. I mean, just coordinating, working on purchase orders, dealing with clients, like even, from interior decorating, interior design, from beginning to end, it's so much, more complicated than people think. So yeah, we're not trying to knock decoration, but we're trying to say it's so much more. And of course, our publisher, who's based in London, the humor there is very, they get it. So they
like it. They want something a little provocative and a little,
yeah, exactly.
I totally get that. Well, the way that the book is laid out, I really like it because it's very simplistic. Like just the way it's even color coded throughout the whole thing, and like it's just like the one page sort of section, the image that goes sort of with that section. It's very easy to follow along. So I thought the layout was really, really good. So diving in a little bit, you mentioned that interior design is everywhere, from coffee table books to TikTok, and so it's throughout everything. It's throughout all the media that we consume. What has had the biggest impact on the interior design field, in your opinion? What are you seeing from your students that's had sort of a huge impact on the field?
Well, the students are clearly on social media a lot. And, that's pretty evident. I think during COVID, we could see everyone's interiors. But I always think, because I'm a big film person, movies, TV, you can't underestimate like the power of TV. I remember there was a show in the 90s called Frasier, and he was a psychiatrist, and he had the Eames Lounge. And then the Eames Lounge became the thing. And then, of course, Mad Men, which was just beautifully designed, really brought mid-century modern to the masses. So I think, good stage designers. I was watching The Studio with Seth Rogen, and that's just LA, and there's just great design there. So I think that's a huge part of it, is getting it from, TikTok, like you said, any type of social media, TV, film, movies, blogs. I think people still read a lot of books and magazines, whether it's online or the actual magazine. What do you think?
Absolutely, 100%. I think the power of TV, with the rise of HGTV, you now have people that are celebrities that are, flipping houses and redesigning and redecorating. It's given interior design a real platform. But then I think that's where some of the misunderstanding of what interior design really is. And so kind of peeling back those layers, right? We're saying, yes, this is interior design, but then what we're also doing and teaching is also interior design. So I think that's where the ubiquity of TV shows is good, but it can also then lead to people coming in and trying to understand, then why are you giving a degree? Why is there an MFA in interior design? So it's double-edged sword, but I think in the end, it's still good.
Yeah. And I think with some of those shows, because a lot of our students do grow up watching design shows, and it's a good thing, because when I was in school, like I didn't know about interior design. I mean, I barely knew about architecture. We had an art program in high school, but it was not strong. So I kind of like found it a little more organically. But now kids are like growing up with this like passion much earlier, which is great. But then they think like, those HGTV shows, like in 4 days, the whole house is done and all the construction, and it's like, it's
Right.
not realistic.
Right.
So there's a bit of Hollywood there, but yeah, I think it's good in the sense that it exposes students to design, and more of them know they want to study design in college, or they go to
Yeah.
pre-college programs, or they seek out other things younger. Yeah, which I think is good.
Well, it's a great section of your book because you do go through all the different mediums. You talk about theater, you talk about social media, you talk about magazines, you talk about books, like all the media that we consume that exposes us to interiors. So yeah, it's really great how you've laid that out. You mentioned you talk about the coffee table book as being the holy grail. What's on your coffee table at the moment? What book would you say is like the holy grail in your house at the moment?
Well, there's so many good ones. And I always tell my students, like, you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but I totally do. Cause I often buy a book just because the cover is so great looking. And sometimes I don't even have time to read it, but it's like the cover is so good. But I like the Atlas of Mid-Century Modern Houses. It's like a great, well, I'll let your viewers look it up and see it, but it's a fairly large book, but it's a great cover and it's great content. What's yours?
Right. There's actually two. Well, there are several. We both love books, but this is the publisher's Phaidon, and they have some just beautiful, fantastic books. But it's also an atlas of 20th and also 21st century world architecture. So it's not just architecture in the United States, but just basically around the world. And it's almost like reads like a who's who.
That's a massive book, and they have a small version, I think.
Yes,
yeah, they made a smaller version.
The book has its own like carrying case. It's so large, right? The spine, it's literally like this big.
Yeah.
But I also have these two Eames books that when you put the spine together, it reads Eames. I mean, it's just really nice. It's just a beautiful book.
Our publisher, Lawrence King, they do creative art books. So they have a lot of great books on like fashion, graphic design. I'm glad you like the design of it. We actually had a graphic designer who's really talented, and we wanted it to be really clear, and we wanted it to be approachable for like the mainstream or somebody who doesn't know anything about design. So that was really important, that it wasn't like, design talk.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things I thought that it's a great intro book. I feel like, because it really just covers I feel like it covers A to Z everything, but in a very sort of bite-sized way. It seems like it could easily become, intro to interior design, like required reading.
Yeah. No, that thank you, because that was definitely our intent, to kind of simplify a complex topic and, write it in a way that it's like fun and approachable, because there are so many aspects of the profession that are fun.
Right.
Yeah. You talk about technology in the book and how students now are getting exposed to different platforms like Revit and Rhino. Do you feel, what's your opinion on these? Do you feel like technology makes it too easy? Does it ever get into the way of learning the fundamentals? Do you find that it's making your students skip over the sketching, the ideating, like all those kind of concepts that you have in your book? What's your thoughts on that? I don't know who wants to answer that one.
I can answer that. Definitely, we actually force them to work analog. So while we have a laser cutter, we do require them to actually make models. Yes, we have computer software, but you have to learn how to sketch first. So the technology in and of itself is never bad. I think some students use it for shorthand for creativity, and you can never sort of work around the fact that you have to work through the creativity, right? You have to figure it out by doing the making. So I think in that sense, some people think, oh, well, if I just use fill in the blank of whatever software, it will generate the ideas for me. And that's really not the use of technology. It does make an idea easier, or if you're trying to do something that's very repetitive, those are great ways that you use the software. But a lot of times students think that that's the way to creativity. but it really isn't. And that's the part that we have to try to pull them apart with, right? You will learn the software. You will, because we want to equip you with the knowledge to be able to work in a firm. But if you don't know how to think on your own, you don't really know why you're using the technology, then you're still back to square one, right? And even not even square one, I would even say you're behind that because you're still relying on something that starts to act as this sort of like film to the design that you want to get to. A lot of times the students spend so much time learning the software that they then forget about, okay, how am I actually going to create? How am I going to be creative? So it's always a push and pull, but I think our curriculum really tries to focus on the analog. So in case the software doesn't work, or the printer doesn't work, or the laser cutter isn't working, you always can rely on analog. And there's also a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of uncertainty. And so if you start to think about those words, that start to create a lot of anxiety, right? Especially when there's a deadline ahead. And so that act of what can I use in order to, go around that or work around that anxiety or that uncertainty, that's where sometimes people rely on software. But that's where we tell students all the time, that's okay. That's part of the design process. The part of the process is not knowing, because if you actually know what's ahead, then that's not being creative, right? Richard Serra, the artist, he actually had a great quote. Basically, he said, when I do something and I know what the end result is, he's like, I stop. He's like, I don't want to know what that end result is. I want to be able to discover that. And so that act of sort of like slow thinking, working slowly, I think that's where sometimes we have to try to like help students to know that it's okay to fail. This is a safe place. Failure doesn't mean that you didn't get it. Failure, everybody has a definition of failure. No, we don't want students to fail out of school. That's not what it is at all.
That's a little too far.
Right. It's just, can you take these risks? And the only way to do that is to try to work through those things. And that's probably part of the battle that we have with students is just sort of letting go of that fear.
Well, it's hard because a lot of them are coming from like mainstream, high school, their curriculum is very math and English. They might have art, maybe they have design if they're lucky, but, it doesn't really focus on that when you take like the ACTs or the SATs, there's no art component. It's a challenge, I think.
It is. I think that this is the difference between convergent and divergent thinking. So whenever you're designing, you're actually thinking both, but first we want to look divergently, right? Cast a wide net. But if you are thinking about our education system, we're asking what's 2 + 2? That is a very convergent answer. Everybody should be getting 4. So there's right there that push and pull of we want you to be loose and be divergent. But then school, as Stephanie said, is, you're studying for your ACTs or your SATs. You don't have a divergent answer. You need to be convergent. So trying to get people to think about it in those ways, that's also the challenge too, which is, I think that's the fun part about
that's
education.
when they put it. Because when they get it,
yeah,
it's like this aha moment. Or, some of them are coming in, they don't know that much about design. They don't know that much about history or movements. And it's great to open their eyes to something completely new because, at the end of the day, like everybody is surrounded by interiors. Like we spend 90% of our time inside and most people don't understand it. So, I'm teaching a freshman seminar for all majors on modern architecture right now. And it's great because I have biology majors, political science, and they're all, confronted with architecture. They're moving throughout their day and there's buildings and interiors, but now they're going to understand. I always say like this class should be required, because everybody's living in this world. There's not that many disciplines that every single person is around.
Affected by it.
Yeah. It's like accounting. Like, I don't know much about accounting, but like everybody, every accountant, spends time in buildings. Yeah. So it's great, for our students who, some of them end up, I'd say most of them do become interior designers, but some go into grad school for other things, or they kind of maybe become, educators or go into like fashion or other, but it's just a great thing to understand. It's a great profession or discipline to like really, really study because it's going to be with them forever. It's like a whole new language.
I like what you said about not having the fear of failure, because it also, I think, opens up the possibility of the happy accident You know what I mean? Or the four,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? That where you end up at a
100%.
place that you didn't
Yeah.
expect, but it ends up being a great
Yeah.
result. So yeah, I think it's good to sort of teach that sort of letting go of, you know, things having to be perfect or one way, or like you said, you said divergent thinking. Yeah, I think that's great. In the conceptual section of your book, you go into the idea of critiques and how it's more than just harsh words, and the value of critiques, and I guess being able to review and evaluate and those kinds of things. Can you give any examples of when you offered critiques to your students and kind of how that maybe had improved, or maybe how it was received, but what it led to in terms of the final result?
I think there are sort of like there's a spectrum, right? There are students that want you to tell them, what do I need to improve this, right? And so they're very receptive and they're very open. And then there are students that say, I will take your feedback, but then I decide whether or not I will take it upon myself to change that. So there's definitely a happy medium, right? The act of judgment, the act of discerning whether or not this feedback pertains to what it is that you're doing, that takes a level of design maturity, right? So not all critique is helpful critique, right? As a professor, yes, we're obviously trying to move the project forward, but it's also as a professor, it's also how you deliver the critique, right? So sometimes there are things that you want to say to improve it, but you don't necessarily go straight in for that. You might start off by saying, this part of your project is really successful. I think that you can keep going with this. And then you follow up by saying, I think there are some things that you could maybe work on. So I always try to approach the critique as a discussion. The critique isn't sort of gospel that's being handed down to the student, right? Because I always want to know, what was your thinking that got you to this point? Not, I see what you've done and I either like it or hate it, right? Because a lot of times students go, do you like it? And I try to explain to them, it's not about my liking. It's not about my education. It's really about, can we talk about what got you to this point, and is your response appropriate? So I think that's trying to help students to understand what critique is. It's sometimes very fearful because nobody wants to be told that you could improve on something. Very rarely do students just go, yes, just tell me.
Yeah.
So I think the approach of the professor trying to help students understand what the critique is, it's not me trying to tear your work down. We are trying to improve it. Talk to me about what you did so that I can give you that feedback that's appropriate. And I think this took me a long time to learn, though.
Well, because when we were in architecture school, it was brutal.
Yeah.
Like there was no, it was just like, if it was good, it was good. If if it was bad, it was bad, and everyone knew. And it was just like there was this kind of like fraternity hazing mentality about like being in architecture school and staying up all night and like just getting your project ripped to shreds. And I don't think
like a
that
boot
is
camp or
really
something.
the best way to learn. Yeah, it was boot
Yeah,
camp. And then
exactly.
students would get so like it's almost like having a boss who's like mean. That doesn't, I mean, having a boss that's good and nice and respectful makes you want to work harder. It kind of did the opposite. But I think
Yeah.
on the other hand, we don't want to like coddle our students, because this is the generation, of the helicopter parents, and they've been given a lot of love, which is, important, but we don't want to just tell them it's good. It's not, and I'll say, look, we brought in these speakers. These are professionals from the field, and they're not spending their time to like just yes you right to death. They're here to make you a better designer, and to do that they need to be honest. But I think with this generation, how it's changed from ours, is right. There is a proper way to do it without crushing their souls. So
Yeah.
I think the critique is really important, that we're not like, this is great, because then they're just delusional. Like they need to know, right, that this isn't strong,
Right.
and that they need to keep working.
Right. So getting students to have a more critical eye, thinking about their project and not just saying, I love it. Okay, but why do you love it? Give
Yeah.
me some reason.
Yeah.
right?
They need to learn how to speak
Right.
in architectural, like interior design.
that vocabulary.
vocabulary.
So I think that, helping them to understand, the language that I'm using and also the where I'm coming from, I think that really helps them to understand, okay, when I approach my work, how might I be able to start thinking in this more critical way about it?
Yeah, and it's not
Well,
always
that's
just student to faculty, right? It's also peer to peer. Like they're working in a studio and they're surrounded by their peers and their projects, and they should be critiquing one another as well.
mhm. Well, that leads me to my question on vocabulary, because that's another section in your book where you talk about the importance of vocabulary. And one of the examples you give is hierarchy. And you explain how what someone who's not in interior design, when they think of hierarchy, may think of it differently than someone who's in interior design, because it can mean different things in terms of like what's most important in the room, or focus, or what's the focal point of the room, or things like that. What are some terms that you kind of wish people would know um, coming into, I guess, whether it's a client coming into a project or whether it's students understanding a critique? What do you feel like are some of the most important vocabulary that they should know?
This is good for her because she teaches the foundation studio where they get into that,
Right.
like concepts and
I
architectural ideas.
Yeah, I think one of the words, hierarchy, when they think that, they think, oh, the CEO at the top of the pyramid, right? And then everybody sort of like filtering down. And so, explaining to them that, yes, another word is axis. Not the axis that the globe spins on, which obviously there is an axis, right? Not axis as in like ACCESS, right? But AXIS. What does that axis mean? And so helping the students to actually understand those vocabulary words, as we call them, that's a really critical part of when you have designers from any part of the world. There's a universal language that we all speak. Helping them to understand these are the words that we want you to start thinking about, and in the ways that you can describe your own work is probably one of the foundational things that you can do as a designer, right? Because then you're talking critically not about your own work, but also about someone else's work. Once you can start doing that and start formulating those ideas, then you're really starting to sort of like, get somewhere. So I don't necessarily have like a certain set of words. We do have, exercises, and then we also use the words during the critique process. So it's just helping students to reinforce those vocabulary words.
Well, that's why we want at school, we really want to hit that home. We want them to really explore these concepts, or like, what's the big idea? And then think about these architectural ideas, because in the real world, you have no time, right? It's like time is money, and you're just like going from one phase to the next. And like, if we don't instill in them like how important a concept is and something that drives a design, and having a really thorough idea where you can like make your decisions, they won't have that when they get out professionally. They'll just be like space planners, right? There won't be like that design. So we do emphasize a lot like concept. And even with my freshmen now, who are all majors, and so it's not a traditional studio, when we're looking at different buildings, we do focus on what's the architectural concept. And we usually use, to simplify it because they're so new at this, like a spatial verb, like extending views or interlocking shapes or something. And then we talk about architectural ideas. So they're, at first they're like, well, the idea is glass. And I'm like, well, glass is not an idea. What is glass doing? And they're like, oh, it's about transparency. And then glass is a way it's achieved. Or it's about, nature. And then you have the indoor outdoor components. So they don't understand that at first. They're just like, oh, there's, this or, they're just
what they see.
Exactly. And then we start to break it down like, okay, there's this overall like architectural idea. And then you have these, how do you achieve those? And I always tell them, like, if you can't back it up with a couple examples, then it's probably not a really strong idea. Right. And I think then you get them as sophomores and they really start applying it to their own work, which is exciting. Because you can look at all the buildings you want, explore interiors, but when you're actually creating one from scratch, that's where the creativity starts.
Yeah.
It's like critical thinking versus creative thinking.
Introducing Benchmade Modern. Tailored sofas crafted just for you, delivered in as little as 4 weeks. Create a custom piece that perfectly reflects your style. Choose from our collection of designs from timeless to modern. Customize the size, then personalize with your ideal fabric, cushion, and leg style. Discover your dream sofa today.
Right. You mentioned design thinking in your book, and you talk about how um, about the human focus, that essentially the design should be serving, I guess, the human, and whether it's function or comfort or whatever like that. And I've always found that a lot of times, especially in the world of design, and maybe more so in contemporary design, but I guess so, and also in older design too, I guess, you have things that look great, but they're not necessarily the most practical or the most functional, or certainly not the most comfortable. Um, just curious to know your thoughts about that and what you're seeing, like, coming out of design firms today. Do you feel like they have the human element in focus in their design thinking, or do you think that's something that's lacking?
Yeah, well, I think the good ones do. What's that quote? It's like the interior should fit the human shouldn't have to fit the interior. So we kind of emphasize, like, to our students, like, you want to design for the most amount of people. So if you're doing a shelf, you don't want it too high, because then only so and so percentage can reach that. I mean, some of the designers that I think are just doing incredible spaces, and many of them are actually in our book, because we've reached out to our favorite designers, and a lot of them have spoken at GW. Space Copenhagen, based in Copenhagen, they do furniture and also interiors, and I think their spaces have such a human quality, just the materiality, the color, the textures. They did this beautiful hotel in New York, 11 Howard, which is just, it's very Scandi, but it just feels amazing. Yeah.
Mhm.
We also love Neri and Hugh. They're represented there in Shanghai, and their work is just really thoughtful. It's very
Textual.
innovative. Yeah. Every project is so based on that context. So they're not just like regurgitating ideas. I think Sal and McCone, based in Brooklyn, are doing really great things. What else? I mean, I loved working for Vincent Wolf. His work, he has a very global eye. He's a real traveler, and he's a photographer, and he's just a genius at, putting things together. And all the projects were very eclectic, and that was a real eye opener.
Yeah.
So
I think the strongest projects are the ones that actually start with a concept. And so that
Yeah.
goes back to our first book that we collaborated on, 25 Concepts in Modern Architecture. We try to explain to students that designing is like writing a paper. So if you start writing a paper, but you don't know what you're writing about, it's sort of all over the place.
Mhm.
And so that's what we try to explain to students, is that the concept is what you're writing about, right? And so you have to test your theory, meaning if you have an idea and you have a concept, those two things have to align, right? You're always in support of the concept, just like if you were writing a paper. So we talk about that, sort of like that's the glue that holds the project together aesthetically, right? In terms of functionality, it's almost like, think of a utensil or any kind of gadget that you have in your kitchen. If you have something, it looks good, but it doesn't work, what do you do with it? You just get rid of it, or it just sits there, right? Now,
Yeah.
obviously, spaces are a little bit different, but you can clearly tell when something isn't working, right? You've gone into a space and you're just like, why did they do this? If only they could have done that, right?
Mhm.
So I always tell students, and Stephanie does too, that functionality is not a concept. It's the basis, right? You have to meet that criteria of, does it do the thing that the client or you said that it was going to, right? And then, so that's where the function and also the concept, that's when you start to bring those two things together. That's when you actually have an interiors that really starts to talk to people. So for me, functionality is just, it has to be
It's a
done.
given,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly, right? It's the lowest threshold, because otherwise, what are you doing?
You want it to function, obviously, but you want to go beyond that. Like, you want your users to walk in the space and be like, how did they think of this? We don't want to, just like create themes or copy, do a French restaurant that looks like Paris. Like, what do you bring to it that's going to wow someone? So it's hard. That's why interior design is not decoration. It's hard because it has to function, but you also want it to be innovative and creative, and you want people to feel good in it. So it is
Right.
really hard to do.
Well, that sort of leads me to you have a whole section that talks about project types. And when I was going through that, there were some project types that I didn't even really consider the design of it. But you give an example how, if you want to serve Italian food, you don't need to build a miniature Rome. You just need to have all the elements that make it so that someone wants to eat there and has whatever the right lighting and the right music and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, I even know from personal experience, there's a Mexican food place I love to go to and the food's great, but I only order takeout because my experience in there is not great. The music's like super loud and I feel like I'm in a nightclub while I'm trying to just have a taco. And you can't have a conversation with anybody next to you. But you even had you talked about healthcare and how, and I like, that's the one I didn't think about, how, the doctor's office or examination room or whatever it is, like you don't really think about, is this space designed properly for what's happening there? Is there, I mean, I know you named a few different firms and things that you thought were doing things right. Are there any specific projects, maybe in DC or in your local area, restaurants or any places that you think are really nailing it, that are nailing all the different aspects you should have to go, to be on your side when it comes to creating a project?
Yeah, I always say I'm not a foodie, I'm a designee. Like I will pick a restaurant just based on the
Vibe.
Yeah. Well, as far as I love coffee shops, I think they're such a great third place where you can just hang out and just.
What do you mean third place?
When they nail it, like it's not your home, it's not your work, but it's a place you go and you could work there, you could meet a friend. It's beyond just grabbing a coffee, right? It's
Right.
a hangout. And I think Blue Bottle, just as a chain, does a really good job because all of their actually Neri and Hugh did a beautiful one in China, but they're all a bit different. And I mean, they have the core, obviously the core graphics and so forth, but there's a beautiful space in Georgetown where they reused an old building and it's all glass and it's just very minimal. And I think that's a great coffee shop. There's a lot of great restaurants. There's a new one that just opened in Cathedral Heights called Aqua Bisteca. It's a Michael Mina restaurant and it has this beautiful bar where just the bottles just glow and sort of this curving banquette that moves throughout the space. And it's so beautifully lit. You want to be there. And it's, somebody thought of that. Someone said, you know what, we want people to look really good in this space. So obviously lighting is very important, but you just want to be there and engage. And of course the food's good.
I just think that when you go to a space, there's this, there's a feeling that you get, right? And there's a fancy architectural word for it called phenomenology. I just call it a feeling. And so whenever I step into those kinds of places, that's the reason why we ask students to go to places, because then you start to create sort of this Rolodex or, cabinet full of memories of spaces that you've been in. And so your body kind of retains that knowledge, right? And so the more spaces that you can go and create that like dictionary of spaces that can also start to influence your designs.
There's a section in your book on materiality, and you discuss the use of stone and brick and wood. And I was just curious to know, I mean, I see you, in terms of where you are and what you're doing, to possibly be kind of on the forefront of new materials, whether it's like recyclables. Or is there anything that you see in design kind of coming up that is different than, I guess, your traditional materials that excites you at all or that you find interesting?
I think there's one material that's kind of interesting. It's mushroom.
Yeah.
It's some sort of like it's a mushroom. And so they've gotten it to the point where it's so stable, it's so strong that they are actually using it for columns. Small
Really?
columns. Right, but the fact that it's so rapidly renewable, it's biodegradable, right? It's kind of fascinating. So I'm always on Dzine, which is this British sort of blog, and so they're always introducing these new materials. Unfortunately, they're not mainstream yet.
Yeah.
but maybe within our lifetimes they won't be. But I think that any designer should really be thinking about what's the future of this material. And if they don't know, that's where they contact the rep, right? The rep would really know about these things. And so you also, as a designer, want to make sure they are not greenwashing the material, meaning can you do a little bit of research to try to understand these materials? And even some firms have come up with what they call a red list. We do not specify any of these materials because of the fact that they're harmful to people,
Yeah.
right? There are literally carcinogens
Mhm.
that then are harmful to people. So I think that because if we think about how much time we spend indoors, right? Over 90%. If you are in a space where you can smell some sort of off gassing, that is not good, right?
Right.
That new car smell, you have
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
new car smell,
It's the
that's
self-building syndrome.
very toxic. That is very dangerous. And so thinking about human beings, not only for the people who are then inhabiting the spaces, but also people installing those materials, right? I feel like it should be some sort of conscious effort on all designers' parts to really think about the future.
One great place to access great materials is Material Connection, which has a big resource center in New York. Our school has a partnership with them, so we have some
Like a subscription.
yeah, we have a cool
Okay.
like kind of setup with a lot of really innovative materials that are there to just give our students some, I guess,
Ideas,
little
inspiration.
inspiration, because again, they're just coming from, oh, there's stone, there's, and we do have a great material library, but yeah, we don't want them to just, use what every other building uses.
I don't think I'm going to look at new car smell the same way now. I've always had a
Carpet,
positive
not
impression
good
of
for
it,
you.
and now I'm like,
I
maybe
know,
I don't
but it
want to
does
have the
smell
new car
good.
smell.
No, you don't.
Well, that leads me to the technical aspect of your book. You go into the importance of codes. You even reference was a Babylonian text that says, where someone got the death penalty because if they didn't build a structure, if it ends up falling on the person and the person dies, like they can get the death penalty. So these codes and the idea of codes are building sound things go a long way back. But I always know there's sort of a balance between safety and, I guess, practicality. And I was just wondering, like, how do you feel about that? As like, you're obviously, I'm guessing that's part of when you're teaching your students as well, that you're teaching, like, things got to be up to code and all that kind of stuff, which I guess is different depending on where you are. Different localities will have different codes and things like that. But do you ever think that the codes can go too far and really sort of hinder growth and, prosperity, things like that?
I mean, I don't think so. I think, well, you wrote the chapters, I'll lay. But I was just going to say, like, I actually think it's good to have these challenges. It's like, it's like doing a puzzle. Like you can't just do whatever you want in interiors because you do have a shell, so you're working within constraints. And I think that just makes having those challenges just kind of is an impetus for creativity. So like as the projects get larger and you go from residential to commercial to healthcare, then you can't use the same materials and you need to have egress and certain amount of occupancy and spaces. And I think that makes, it definitely heightens the challenge, but I think that's what makes good designers is having those considerations and being able to, still create good work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think though, we probably don't think about life safety issues because we understand when we enter a space, we will just leave it the way we came in. But let's say there's a fire literally in front of that. Now what do you do? And you can't see, right? There's smoke everywhere. So you don't think about those kinds of things until, hopefully, God forbid, it doesn't happen. And so one of the things that the NCIDQ exam challenges us as interior designers is, can you create a safe space for people? So the NCIDQ exam doesn't ask what kind of color combination do you think goes with this kind of space. It's really about testing your life safety.
Yeah.
Are you using the right materials that are appropriate to make it so that people aren't slipping and falling? It's not a hazard. So getting students to understand that that's the reason why you're getting an education. That's the reason why there is an exam. It's actually critical. So yeah, we have some parameters besides, cost or time, right?
Mhm.
So working within the building shell, right? Trying to understand, okay, where's the second means of egress? Those are all kinds of things that you as a designer, especially in a commercial setting, you're getting hired. That's why you're
Your
getting paid.
expertise,
Right,
yeah.
exactly. Not, well, I have a really good eye and I can put these things together. Yes, you're getting paid for that too, but the first and foremost in all of our public spaces is how do we get people out of here safely? And so if you can't get that done, then really everything else is just window dressing.
Yeah, because I think the professional organizations, they define interior design. They always say the health, safety, and welfare. So yeah, you want a great looking space and you want people to, feel good and you want to be able to move through the space easily, but you are dealing with the public and their health. So
Right.
it's important.
Well, you do have that section in your book on construction admin towards the end of the book.
Yeah.
And, you talk about what ends up being called like a change order where you're having to, I guess, reassess and maybe requote a client or the price changes or something like that. What do you think is the most common issue that tends to pop up that requires a change order?
Being in Washington, D.C., we have a height limit. So the buildings cannot go beyond a certain height. So then as a landlord, I am trying to put as many floors into that height limit as possible, right? Because I want as many tenants as possible. Enter the low ceiling in DC. So in Washington, DC, if you've ever worked in the city, you will always have a conflict where you have a light fixture and there's the housing. And then the housing, right? So there's an area called the plenum, which is basically from the finished ceiling to the slab up above. And so that plenum space is fraught with HVAC, right? So the ducts have to go through. Then we also have AV. We have a lot of wiring. We have plumbing. We have lighting. So the next thing you know, as a designer, we don't see all of that stuff until it's demolished. And then you have all these beautiful light fixtures everywhere. And so sure enough, the general contractor calls you and says, guess what? We can't fit those light fixtures where you want them. Or these light fixtures, the housing is just too high. You're gonna have to specify something different. You try to avoid it, but when I worked in the industry for over a dozen years, every project that I worked on, I think practically there was some sort of change order with the light fixture. It's not because I didn't do my homework or the general contractor didn't warn me, or it's just the reality. So that's just been my experience. And usually the client is very understanding. They understand that these are the parameters of the building and this is what we're doing. I can't move this light fixture because I also have sprinkler heads that I can't move. So those are the kinds of things that maybe precipitate a change order and an RFI, which is request for information.
Yeah. And I remember working in New York at a lot of buildings, they're old buildings and, you open up the wall and okay, there's asbestos and now there needs to be a full, asbestos cleaning and that's going to cost money. And you never know, there could be a column when you open that up and you can't move it, or, it's a little bit of a surprise. But I think that one of the things that I did love about working for Vincent, among other things, is that he was very confident and he didn't change his mind a lot. And I think what happens too is that designers will do walkthroughs, on site and be like, oh, wait, maybe I should do that, and second guess and then making a change order. And I remember the contractors were always like, we love working with Vincent because he never changes his mind. Like what you have in the CDs is what, and maybe keeping the client away. We always had clients who are like, I want to come see it under construction. And we were like, no, because what will happen is they'll see it and they'll freak out because it's a mess. Right. And if we can keep them out and then they come in when it's done and they're like, this is amazing. So
there's also the idea that a set of drawings is complete. It's, all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And if you've ever looked at a drawing set, it's not only the designer who's contributing, but you also have that maybe the MEP engineer, you also have a lighting consultant, you might also have any number of consultants working on that drawing set. So inevitably there's an error, there's an omission, there's something that you just didn't catch, even though someone's been looking at the drawing sets, if you will, ad nauseum, right? So sometimes there's just something that is just missed. We're trying to keep those things at a minimum, but we're human beings.
Yeah.
So the complexity of the drawing sometimes.
There's so many details.
So that's why I always tell students whenever you go on the job site, yes, you might be the one with the degree, you've got the MFA, but your general contractor, your superintendent, they're your friend.
Oh yeah.
100%.
You talk to them every single day.
Yes. Be nice to them.
Yeah. But you do have to be really organized and detail oriented to be a designer, especially if you're managing a job. But
And multiple
hopefully
ones.
there's like a little padding, so if there's a small error. But yeah,
Right.
it's almost impossible to not have, with all the dimensions and all the details.
There's going to be
But
something.
it's a fun process.
Yes.
There's going to be something. Yeah. Totally.
Well, you touch on
Right.
so many different areas in your book. I mean, we only touched just on a few, but it goes like we went through media and culture, experiential, the conceptual, the spatial, the different project types, the materiality, the products, all these different things. So it's definitely a very thorough introduction into a lot of areas in interior design. Which was the hardest section to write?
I don't think there was anything that was so hard. I think because it was all really interesting. I mean, we divvied up the chapters as I mentioned, and we were able to really focus on the ones that kind of spoke to us. I mean, it was just really cool to kind of dig in and kind of take our whole experience and kind of make it palatable for people that are interested in design. I mean, I loved the product chapter because I'm such a product junkie, which is sort of ironic because I'm also a minimalist. So, but I do appreciate design. And I love furniture, as I mentioned, and wall coverings and paint and, just all art. So that was really fun. I mean, obviously the media and culture was really fun. And the profession. I mean, I was just thinking about, I worked at really big firms and I worked at really small firms. But really the process is the same, right? You kind of start with your schematic and then you go into design development and so on and so forth. And then you hopefully, do continuing education when you're working. And it was kind of fun to kind of brush up on that and kind of explain it to the future designers.
I think the challenge was to keep it succinct.
Oh, true. The word limit was hard.
Right.
Yeah.
So we had to write succinctly because I think some of these chapters we could have just kept going.
Yes,
right.
that's true.
And so Stephanie and I set a parameter up for ourselves that, yes, we're going to fit in this page. And I think that's where sometimes we had to cut some of the things that we wanted to say more about. I think the other was, we had access to some really great images. Right.
That was probably the hardest part is finding the
And
photos and getting all the rights. Yeah.
so sometimes finding the appropriate one
We're very picky. Yeah.
to speak about that particular topic was really quite challenging.
Going back to the beginning, you talk about, and this is, I guess, just a bit of creative projection, maybe. But you talk about in the beginning how in the section where you go talk about the coffee table book, you mentioned how, prior to that, people were sort of huddled around the fireplace for warmth. And the introduction of central heating basically made it so that people no longer had to go, huddle around the fire. Now they were huddling around, like their living spaces were being organized differently. And, then you have the coffee table and essentially the coffee table book and all that kind of stuff. I was wondering, is there something that you either see or could imagine changing the way that we live coming up in the future? Is there something that's going to change the way we organize our common spaces, our living spaces, to where, it's not going to be around the TV anymore, or, you know what I mean? Any thoughts on that? Anything that you can kind of see changing the way that we organize our living spaces?
Because of COVID and people working from home, that kind of kickstarted it. And then obviously having capabilities on Zoom and so forth, and just more and more people working from home or the flexibility now, I think it's really changed the dynamic of work from home and having an office, which used to be something a little bit more makeshift to something a little bit more substantial. I think people are really thinking about incorporating a workspace that's really usable, not just like taking their dining chair and, dragging it in, but actually having an ergonomic setup So I think that's changed a lot how we work and incorporating that into the home. What do you think?
Mm.
I think that the ubiquity of technology, when I was growing up, we had one TV, right? You want to watch TV, you're gonna have to
And
go down here
channels.
and change. Yeah, stand up and change the channel. We didn't even have a remote. That's how old I am. So I think, if you start thinking about, I want to watch Netflix, my husband wants to watch ESPN, right? My daughter wants to watch. So you start to have this idea of isolation and the idea that what do we have to gather around? The idea of like storytelling, gathering around the campfire, those kinds of oral traditions, they're pretty much gone now, right? So what do we have, right? And so I kind of see people sort of like drawing away from even like the common thing, which is the TV, right? We all have our own devices, right? And so how are we able to bring everybody together again? So I think that is kind of like a curious thing. It's more of like a sociological, socioeconomic thing, maybe perhaps. But I just feel like with
Mm.
everybody having their own cell phone, what is the thing that brings us all together?
I mean, food's always a great, gathering point. And that's why kitchens used to be separate rooms. And
Yeah,
then
with
they
a
caught
door.
on, Frank Lloyd Wright, open floor plan. And then people caught on, and even more traditional houses, which are very, four door, walls and a door, started creating these open kitchens. Right. So now that's sort of, people like to entertain and see one another. But I think, yeah, going back to like the dinner table and, those are just rituals within a family that I think, or whatever your family is, friends,
Right.
which can make a really big difference. So having a space, I always love a circular table, like the Saarinen table, which we're sitting at right now, because you don't have the legs, like it's just a pedestal in the center. So you can pull up 4 chairs, 6 chairs, and you're all looking at one another. If you're on a long rectangular table, you're not going to have that same dynamic, because
Yeah.
even if it's just 6 or 8 people, you're not talking to anybody
Just
way over there.
next to each other.
So I think thinking about just when you buy your dining room table or your kitchen table, what shape is going to create, more
Unity.
conversation, and what chairs, yeah, there's great looking chairs, but if they're not comfortable, you're not going to sit there for a long time. So, I think making spaces that are comfortable and, have that
Inviting, yeah,
community, I think is
absolutely.
really important. It's like you can only take so much of like scrolling, right? Until you're like, okay, enough.
Right.
But I think as interior
Yeah.
designers, like you can make things happen by the design. And that's why we think interior design is so important. It's not just, it's not just decoration. I mean, it is just creating moments in people's lives and connecting.
Right. We have one final question that we always ask everyone that comes on the podcast, and you can answer this in any way that you want. And that is, what is it that you do to stay creative?
Oh, that's good.
That is a great question.
Well, I sketch a lot. I should sketch more. But that definitely feeds my soul. And that's just like a very simple pen and paper, nothing fancy, going out and just drawing what I see. I love the feeling of putting pen to paper and then having a result. And also, you look at something really deeply when you draw it. You really know what that building or environment is after you're drawing it. So I've always loved sketching, watercolor too, but that's a little more high maintenance. So thinking really simple.
Yeah, I would definitely think travel.
Yeah,
I think
of course.
travel
Yeah, we
is
love
one of
travel.
the fundamental things. Again, not knowing, going to a place that you're maybe unfamiliar with and having to navigate through that. Whenever Stephanie and I go, we hit the pavement.
Oh,
We are
yeah.
walking. But that's also another way to really kind of in your mind remember how the city is. I think also I love working with my hands, and so right now I took up bookbinding. The act of making, there's a knowledge with any kind of thing that you do with your hand. So even if it's drawing or cooking or making, there's an architect who he basically says there's a knowledge that your hand has that starts to become embodied with what you're doing. And so at first I thought it was always me, just why do I like to make things? I don't know why, right? But I have now realized that act of making anything, whether it's crocheting or I don't know, even making a cookie or something that I don't know about, this active bookbinding engages me to the point where I kind of get lost with the time. I kind of get in this flow. And so losing myself in that,
and then having something to show for it, which
sure,
is cool.
sure,
Yeah,
right.
As
But
Brazil.
yeah, so I think, anybody would probably say, traveling is
Museums,
probably,
we love like art exhibits.
yeah, again, it's just sort of like
People
filling
watching. It's
filling
so
that
fun.
well,
Yeah,
right, of
yeah.
imagination, that if you just sit, you actually start to drain it. You have to go out into the world and always kind of fill it. So even as an introvert, right, that's where, my partner in crime, she's always like, let's do that. And I'll be like, okay. And then she'll be like, come on. And
But then you're like, we're really glad we went. Like, you're like, oh, I don't want to go out on a weekday, whatever. And then you go to this like panel or
right.
some event and you're like, wow, that really gave me something to think about. That's what I tell my students. I'm like, you have to kind of,
get
force
out there.
Yourself to engage with.
So that's why we just work really well together.
That's great advice. The book is Interior Design is Not Decoration and Other Ideas. Professor Stephanie Travis and Professor Catherine Anderson, thank you so much for your time today. I know we went a little long, but I do really appreciate you coming on and sharing your wealth of knowledge. And so if someone wants to get that book, where can they go and get it? How can they find out more information?
Well, they can go to the publisher's website, Lawrence King, or they can go to Amazon. Of course, most people find that to be the easiest. It's in brick and mortar bookshops as well. But I guess the easiest is, Amazon or Lawrence King.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, we really appreciate